We have now entered the final 3 years of our Decade of Centenaries. From 1919 until this time, 100 years ago, the 9 battalions of the Kilkenny Brigade were active and somewhat successful. The main success was the attack on Hugginstown RIC barracks in March 1920. This attack was commanded by Brigadier Thomas Tracy from Dean Street. The main consequence of this attack was that most, if not all, of the rural RIC barracks were closed throughout the county. And indeed, most of these closed barracks were destroyed by individual battalions of the Kilkenny Brigade over Easter 1920. From late spring 1920, the Royal Irish Constabulary Special Reserve Constables began to appear throughout the county, and they were very identifiable by their mixed military police uniforms, and they quickly became known as the Black and Tans. In August 1920, A Company of the Auxiliary Division of the Royal Irish Constabulary were garrisoned in Woodstock House near Inistioge. And from the late winter 1920, martial law was imposed throughout the county. It is in this context that we will discuss and narrate the events that happened on that fateful morning on the 21st of February 1921 on Friary Street. In order to tell the story, we are going to follow the footsteps taken by the Devonshire Regiment as they progressed along their route from the Barrack Gate up until Kilkenny Jail that morning. The story of the Friary Street Ambush starts in Delaney's tailoring shop, Watergate, towards the end of 1920. The recent arrest of Ernie O'Malley at O'Hanrahan's farm close to Inistioge and the capture of his classified notebook filled with critical information had led to widespread arrests of prominent IRA commanders. Peter de Lucre, the brigade commander, James Rowan, officer commanding of the 7th Battalion, and many other active volunteers were arrested and imprisoned. This was being felt hard locally. George O'Dwyer, the newly appointed brigade commander, had recently received a dispatch from Army headquarters requiring more action be taken in his area of operations. In early January, O'Dwyer, along with Patrick Bryan of Kearn Street, who was the brigade quartermaster, had a meeting with Tim Hennessy in Bryan's home. O'Dwyer was annoyed about the tactical situation and he wanted more offensive action, and soon. Tim Hennessy knew he was required to activate the members of his 1st Battalion, select a suitable target and implement a plan of attack on some part of the Crown forces in Kilkenny City. He was informed that a ration party of the Devonshire Regiment brought fresh rations to the military guard in Kilkenny Jail every day. He decided that this would be a good target for a planned future operation. Tom Nolan Outrat was selected to assist him with all the planning, and like Hennessy, Nolan was a veteran of the Hugginstown attack. It was decided that the objective of the mission would be to apprehend the troops, gain possession of their arms, ammunition and documents, disable the soldiers, withdraw to a safe area where they would disperse into the local population. At the same time, the rules of engagement in force on the day prevented the attackers from using lethal force except for self-protection. It is important here to discuss the implication of this most important mission-hinging restriction placed on the attacking force. It is a tactical imperative that the attackers, triggering an ambush, use the element of surprise to neutralise the enemy with lethal force. The limiting of the ambush party to use of force for self-protection only would have a very damaging effect. The order of battle was as follows. The Kells group was led by James O'Brien, with Thomas Welch, Jim Thorpe, Paddy Hine and Michael Brennan. The Bennettsbridge group consisted of Johnny Green, Ned Gooley, Paddy Murphy, Dick Fitzgerald, Danny Murphy. And the Three Castles group consisted of Tom Hennessy, Michael Darmody, Ned Dunn, Dick McAvoy. Logistical support was supplied by Tom Carney, Tim Gaffney and Philip Dillon, and the scout was Dennis Mulhall. In all, 18 volunteers were on active service on the morning of the 21st of February 1921. However, only 14 were on Friary Street, which gave the attackers a 2-to-1 numerical advantage over the Devonshire patrol. The Three Castles men parked their bicycles at St Mary's Cathedral. The Bennettsbridge and the Kells group parked their bicycles at the Bottling Store, now Brennan's Public House on Walton Street. First, the Three Castles men deployed at the Friary. Thomas Hennessy and Michael Dermody took up position at the Garden Row laneway. Dick McAvoy and Dunn took up position at the Friary porch. The 5 Bennettsbridge men positioned themselves at Hackett's pub. Ned Gooley and Danny Murphy were lying in the doorway of the pub and Dick Fitzgerald was standing behind them. Tom Murphy and Johnny Green were on the street, one reading a paper and the other pretending to fix his bicycle. The Kells group were in position at Garrigan's stone cutting yard. Jim O'Brien checked and confirmed that all the groups were in position. The ambush would be activated by his whistle blast, and he would give the order when the main party were in line with his position. Martin Mulhall, who was already performing the recce task, cycled through the patrol and confirmed that they were deployed as normal. He then doubled back and noticed that the patrol looked relaxed and were just a little behind time. He cycled up Friary Street. At around this moment, Dick McAvoy noticed 2 things. Firstly, a lady was emerging from a house directly across from Garrigan's. Also, a man was leaving the Friary and heading down past the soldiers. The advance guard and the main party passed the Friary. Dick, Dunn and McAvoy were tense and ready for a signal to launch the attack. Suddenly they noticed that Hennessy and Dermody moved from their position into the street. They moved and met at the centre of the street. Hennessy made a snap decision to send Dunn and McAvoy back to the porch of the Friary, while he and Dermody would disarm the rear guard soldiers that had looked relaxed and were chatting to each other. They walked past the soldiers, then turned and attacked them from the rear. There were still no whistle blasts from the main party, as they were not yet in line with Garrigan's yard. Jim O'Brien at this time didn't know what was going on down the street, and he was concealed from the view of the ration party. The lady on the street screamed, "Soldiers, you're being attacked." Immediately, the 2 soldiers from the main party turned around and took cover in the doorway at the Friary wall. They took aim and fired at least 4 shots in quick succession. The use of force by the Devonshire soldiers had an immediate effect. 2 active service members of the 1st Battalion Kilkenny Brigade IRA were dying on the road, and an innocent bystander, Mr. Thomas Dullard, was mortally wounded. Unfortunately, Tom Hennessy and Michael Dermody are now in their final resting place as a consequence of them not engaging with lethal force. The rules of engagement imposed by the battalion commander that fateful morning on Friary Street were in all probability imposed in order to prevent the sacking of Kilkenny City. Similar sackings had happened in Balbriggan, Thurles, Templemore, Cork and Limerick, to mention a few. When there were Crown Force fatalities, the reprisals were swift and very devastating on the area where they happened. It is important now, when we engage with our Decade of Centenaries, that we focus and remember important events like the Friary Street Ambush. Its legacy forms part of our national consciousness and indeed part of how we as Kilkenny citizens remember the War of Independence.